Billionaire father sees black waitress let his disabled son lead a dance step, and his life changes. The chandeliers hummed with a golden glow, casting light across crystal glasses and polished marble floors. A string quartet was mid-phrase when the sound faltered, not because they stopped, but because the room itself had gone still. Every eye turned toward the far end of the ballroom, where a slim black waitress, balancing her tray with one hand, had suddenly lowered it to the table. Her other hand wasn't empty anymore. It was resting lightly in the palm of a boy no one expected to rise. His leg braces clinked faintly as he pushed against his chair, determination sharper than any music. And she, without announcing it, without asking permission, shifted her weight and let him lead, one trembling step onto the dance floor. The bow of the first violin hovered in midair. Guests froze with forks inches from their lips. Somewhere, a cough was swallowed. And at the head table, the billionaire father's expression tightened unreadable, as if power itself had been challenged in public. But the boy didn't care. Nor did she. Together they moved, slow, halting but real. A step that wasn't about perfection, but about connection. The room was waiting to see. Would this small rebellion be crushed, or would it be allowed to live? Sometimes the moments that stop a room are the ones worth remembering. Stay with me. The manager was the first to recover. His patent leather shoes clicked sharply across the parquet, his voice low but edged. "Sir, this isn't proper. Should I?" The billionaire didn't answer. He just lifted a hand, silencing the man like one might silence a dog. The gesture was smooth, practiced. He was a man accustomed to control, not to being tested. Around him, whispers swirled. A woman in diamonds leaned toward her husband. Can you imagine? In front of everyone. Her pearls shook with her disapproval. Two young executives smirked into their champagne, masking their laughter as coughs. No one said what they were all thinking aloud, that a waitress, a black waitress, had no right to command the room. But on the floor, she stood steady. Not defiant, not afraid. Her hand remained in the boy's, her back straight, her step small and deliberate, allowing him to dictate the pace. Every shift of her body said, "This is his moment, not mine." The boy's braces squeaked as he found rhythm and hesitation. His jaw clenched with the effort of balance. His father's eyes narrowed, unreadable, but there was something flickering behind them, faint as a shadow. Power had always defined this man. His fortune built towers in 3 cities. His name carved wings into hospitals. His word moved markets. Yet here now, he sat utterly powerless before the sight of his son daring to move without his permission. The guests sensed it. The hierarchy of the room bent awkwardly, like a mirror cracking. The billionaire's authority, once unquestioned, was being tested by a child's shaky step and the courage of a woman who carried plates. The manager leaned closer. "Sir, say the word. I'll put an end to this." But he didn't. He couldn't. Memories stirred, uninvited. The hospital nights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the doctor's clipped tones. He'll never walk without aid, never speak with strength, never lead. He had accepted that verdict, buried his grief in business, in deals, in control. Now, against all logic, his son was leading someone. A muscle twitched in his cheek. He masked it with a sip of wine, his fingers too tight around the stem. Across the room, cameras from discreet phones tilted, eager to capture scandal or miracle. The stakes stretched higher with each unsteady step. The waitress glanced up, not at the father, not at the guest, but at the boy. Her expression carried no pity, only focus. She bent slightly, whispering something no one else heard. His lips pressed together, then parted in a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. The quartet, uncertain, picked up a thread of music again. Softer, slower, as if the melody itself had decided to follow the boy. And in that fragile space, between prejudice and possibility, the billionaire felt the unfamiliar. Pressure he couldn't buy off, a silence he couldn't command, a question he couldn't answer yet. The music thinned, then stopped entirely. The guests shifted, restless, waiting for the balance of power to be restored. The billionaire placed his glass down with precision, the sound of crystal on marble sharper than applause. "Enough," he said at last. Not loud, but the word carried like thunder through the ballroom. The boy froze, his hand trembling in hers. The waitress steadied him, her palm warm against his, refusing to let the moment collapse. She turned her eyes to the father, calm, respectful, unyielding. The manager stepped forward, eager to execute, but the billionaire raised a finger, and even he stopped. A pause stretched, a test of wills played out in silence. Finally, the billionaire stood. His height commanded the room as naturally as wealth commanded respect. He adjusted his cufflinks, the diamond studs flashing under chandelier light. "You, bring him to my table." It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the certainty of a man who'd never been denied. Gasps flickered among the guests. Some expected her to bow, to obey instantly. Others whispered bets on whether she'd lose her job on the spot. The waitress lowered her gaze to the boy. Not the father, not the room, just the boy. "Do you want to stop?" she asked softly. He shook his head, barely, but enough. Her chin lifted. She didn't bow. She didn't apologize. She guided him forward, step by halting step, not breaking the fragile rhythm they had created. She would come to him, but on the child's terms, not the father's. It was subtle, but everyone noticed. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He tapped a finger against a linen tablecloth, as if considering whether to crush or to play along. His son's face glowed with effort, with a kind of pride the man had never seen. Not in clinics, not in tutors, not in the mirror gyms where therapists had failed. By the time they reached the table, the silence was suffocating. The boy steadied himself, clinging to the waitress's arm. The billionaire looked from her to him, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You," he said to her, his voice as cold as polished steel. "Tomorrow, noon, my office. You'll explain exactly what you think you're doing." Around them, forks paused midair. The room held its breath. She didn't flinch. "If he asks me," she replied evenly, "I'll come." The boy smiled faintly, his braces creaking as he shifted his weight, still standing. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt like he had no control at all. The next day, noon came with the kind of precision only wealth enforces. The tower rose above the city like a monument to control. Steel, glass, mirrored surfaces that reflected the sky but never let anyone look in. She arrived on time. No tray in her hands, no uniform. Just a simple blouse and skirt, neatly pressed, worn with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth wasn't stitched into fabric. The receptionist glanced up, already informed. "Top floor. He's waiting." The elevator ride was silent, but heavy. Cameras watched. Her reflection stared back at her in the chrome walls. No music, no chatter, just the hum of machinery lifting her higher into his world. When the doors opened, the difference was immediate. Marble floors stretched into an office the size of a ballroom. Panoramic windows washed the room in light, as if the sky itself bowed at his command. The billionaire sat at a desk that looked less like furniture and more like an altar. His son wasn't there. This was a test between two people alone. "You humiliated me," he said, not even offering her a chair. His voice was calm, but edged. "Do you have any idea who I am?" She met his gaze without raising her chin. "I know who your son is." A pause. The kind of pause that could end careers. "You think I can't replace you?" A waitress. Disposable. His hand tapped once on the glass desk. Her voice stayed even. "You can replace a waitress. You can't replace a moment that gave him dignity." His eyes narrowed, but there was something else behind them, an echo of the boy's stubborn half-smile. He leaned back, studying her like an equation. "How much do you want?" To teach him, to continue whatever that was. He flicked his hand, dismissive, like money could buy any human truth. She didn't move. "This isn't about money." That stopped him. No one ever said that to him. Not and meant it. "If you want to work with him," she continued, "it has to be on his terms. He leads. Not you. Not me. Him." The billionaire's jaw clenched. He had spent a lifetime bending the world, buying silence, owning outcomes. And yet this woman, this waitress, was drawing boundaries he couldn't cross with power alone. For the first time in years, he found himself unsure of the next move, and in the silence, He realized he'd already lost the first round. The following week, the setting was nothing like the tower or the ballroom. No chandeliers, no marble floors. Just a quiet studio on the edge of the city. Scuffed wooden planks, mirrors with fingerprints, faint echoes of old music drifting from speakers. It smelled faintly of polish and dust, but it felt alive. The boy stood in the doorway, braces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His father loomed behind him, arms crossed, body stiff as steel. The woman waited in the center, her posture calm, her hands resting loosely at her sides. "Today," she said softly, "he leads." The father almost interrupted, but caught himself. His jaw shifted. His son's eyes darted toward him, then back to her. Slowly, the boy shuffled forward, each step echoing louder than applause. She extended her hand, not to pull, not to push, but to offer. "You choose," she whispered. The boy's fingers trembled as they closed around hers. He looked down at his own feet, the braces weighing him like anchors. And then, with a breath that seemed to shake the air, he moved one foot forward, the tiniest step, awkward, unbalanced, but she followed, not guiding, not correcting, simply matching his rhythm. For the first time in years, no one told him how to move. He decided. The father's throat tightened. He wanted to say, "Straighten your back," or "Hold her hand tighter," but he forced himself silent. Every instinct screamed to control, to perfect. Instead, he stood still and watched. The boy took another step, then another. He stumbled, nearly fell. She let him wobble, her grip firm enough to steady, soft enough to let him recover. His laugh, quick, surprise, unguarded, filled the room. A sound the father hadn't heard in months. Minutes passed, each step slow, uneven, yet with every motion, the boy's shoulders lifted, his chest opened. He was no longer a patient, no longer fragile porcelain. He was a boy on a floor, leading a dance. At one point, he stopped and looked up at his father, not seeking approval, but daring him to interfere. The father's hands flexed at his sides. For the first time, he lowered his gaze. He let his son keep the power. The small studio became a cathedral of silence and motion. No audience, no cameras, no applause. Just a rhythm of braces against wood, and the quiet miracle of choice. When at last the boy sank into a chair, sweat on his brow, he grinned. "Did you see?" he asked, voice breathless. The father swallowed hard, unable to trust his own voice. The woman answered instead, her tone light but steady. "We all saw." The boy leaned back, satisfied. For him, it wasn't about conquering a ballroom or proving anything to strangers. It was about taking the first step that belonged to him. The billionaire turned toward the window, blinking against the light. For the first time, control didn't feel like strength. It felt like a cage. And letting go, even just an inch, felt terrifying. But in that quiet studio, with scuffed floors and mirrors that didn't flatter, he saw something wealth had never bought him, a glimpse of freedom, reflected in the unsteady steps of his son. Later that evening, after the boy had gone home with his nurse, the father stayed behind. The studio was empty except for the faint hum of lights and the woman wiping down the mirrors with slow, deliberate strokes. He cleared his throat. "What exactly is this?" His tone was measured, but the edge of impatience cut through. She didn't look at him at first. "It's not a program. Not therapy in the way you're used to." She wrung out the cloth, her reflection wavering in the glass. "It's about letting him lead, about giving him the dignity of choice." The father frowned. "Choice? He can barely walk." Her eyes flicked to him, steady and unflinching. "And yet today he chose. He stepped, you followed. That's how change begins, not with force, but with trust." The words lodged in his chest like an unwelcome truth. He had built empires by commanding, by making others bend. Even with his son, he had tried to will progress into being doctors, specialists, machines. Nothing had worked. She continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "Every time you push, he resists. Every time you lead, he follows only out of fear. But when you let him guide, even if it's messy, he grows. That's the difference." The father sank into one of the old studio chairs, leather groaning under his weight. "It isn't," she replied. "It takes patience. It takes surrender. Most people in your position cuddied the scuffed floorboards, the marks left by years of practice. You make it sound simple, and do it. They'd rather control the outcome than risk imperfection." Her words cut sharper than any insult, because they rang true. He pressed his palms together, a gesture more prayer than calculation. "And you? Why do you care?" She folded the cloth neatly, setting it aside. "Because I was a child no one followed. Because I know what it feels like to be moved like a piece of furniture, not a person. I swore I'd build something different." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. The father's gaze drifted to the mirror, where both their reflections stood side by side. Power and humility, command and calm. A phrase the boy had spoken earlier echoed in his mind. "Did you see?" He had seen. And now, for the first time, he wondered if watching, truly watching, was a first step toward leading differently. The gala was never meant for children. It was marble floors and champagne glasses, gowns that trail like rivers, and conversations sharpened to impress. Yet that night, in the middle of the glittering fundraiser, a hush rippled across the room as the boys stepped onto the polished floor. The father stood a few paces behind, his tuxedo immaculate, his jaw set. He had agreed, reluctantly, that the woman could guide his son through this experiment. But he hadn't agreed to this. An audience. Cameras from donors, influencers, and journalists tilted toward them, lenses gleaming like watchful eyes. The boy's braces clicked softly as he moved. The waitress, no, not a waitress anymore, but something steadier, knelt to meet his gaze. "Your choice," she whispered. The microphone boom above caught nothing but the movement of her lips. He looked around. Hundreds of eyes waited, some with pity, some with doubt, others already preparing polite applause for inevitable failure. His small hand trembled, but he lifted it, not toward her, not toward his father, but out into the open air. The music began, a slow waltz, each note stretching like silk. He took one step. The room froze. Another step, wobbly, uneven, but still his. Gasps fluttered among the crowd. Someone raised the phone higher, the screen's red dot blinking. The father's instinct screamed to rush forward, to steady him, to seize control. He felt the weight of reputation pressing down. A billionaire son stumbling in public, becoming a spectacle. He could already imagine the headlines, the pity. His fists clenched. But then the woman's eyes caught his, firm and calm. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Let him lead. The boy swayed, knees buckling, and the sound of glassware rattling on trays cut through the music. A murmur rippled. Failure was coming. The father's body leaned forward, but he forced himself still. His breath came ragged, as though holding still was a harder fight. And then, impossibly, the boy righted himself. He inhaled sharply, lifted his chin, and pressed forward. His arm extended, asking, not commanding, for a partner. Silence thickened. No one moved. And then, against every instinct bred from pride and power, the father stepped onto the floor. Slowly, deliberately, he took his son's hand. The crowd exhaled in unison. Cameras clicked furiously, flashes bursting like fireworks. But the boy didn't see them. His eyes locked on his father's, burning with fierce, fragile pride. Together they moved. Not gracefully, not perfectly, but in rhythm, his rhythm. Each step small, shaky, but alive with something no billionaire could purchase. Agency. The woman stood at the edge, hands folded, expression unreadable. She wasn't the star of this scene, and she didn't need to be. This was his, by the final note. The boy leaned into his father's side, breathless but smiling, the braces still gleaming under the lights. For once, applause didn't feel like pity. It roared like thunder, genuine, stunned, changed. And though the father's hand shook as he held his son's, he didn't wipe away the tears streaking down his face. Cameras captured them all, but for the first time, he didn't care. The thunder of applause had barely faded when silence returned, sharper than before. Every eye remained fixed on the father. His reputation had been built on command, Markets bent when he spoke. Ministers paused when he entered a room. But here, under chandeliers and cameras, he was no longer the master of the stage. His son was. The boy's hand was still in his, small but steady. He looked down, meeting those eyes that didn't plead or apologize. They simply asked, "Will you follow me even now?" The father's throat tightened. For years, he had seen weakness when he looked at his son, fragility, limitation, failure that wealth couldn't erase. Tonight, he saw something else entirely, defiance, the kind that refused to be pitted, the kind that asked for dignity, not protection. The crowd was waiting. Some leaned forward, others held their breath. A billionaire could end this with one dismissive nod, laugh it off as a sweet moment, before sweeping it aside. But if he did, he would never step out from under the weight of what his son had just shown them all. He dropped his gaze, not to the cameras, not to the donors, but to the woman standing at the edge of the floor. The waitress who wasn't a waitress anymore. She met his stare, without flinching. No bowing of the head, no apology. Only that silent command. Trust him. Yield. Something in his chest gave way. His jaw unclenched, his shoulders lowered. Slowly, deliberately, the father shifted his stance. And then, before 100 lenses, he did the unthinkable. He let go, not out of neglect but faith. He released his son's hand, stepped back one pace, and allowed the boy to stand alone in the center of the marble floor. Gasps filled the room. The boy wavered, trembling, but he didn't fall. His knees locked, his back straightened. The chandeliers caught the steel of his braces and turned them into fire. And the father, known for never bowing, lowered his head. A gesture small in movement, but seismic in meaning. He had yielded not to wealth, not to power, but to his own child's will. For the first time in his life, applause didn't belong to him. And that was the point. Winter had passed into spring before anyone realized how much had shifted. The father's name, once tied only to stock tickers and skyscrapers, now appeared in places it had never been. Community centers, adaptive dance programs, scholarships carrying his son's initials. Reporters still asked if it was a PR stunt, but those who walked into the old downtown studio knew better. The cracked mirrors had been replaced, the warped floorboard sanded smooth, yet the spirit of the room remained. Children embraces, wheelchairs, and hearing aids filled it with sound, not the sound of pity or instruction, but of music they chose themselves. At the edge of the floor, the woman still guided quietly, never pushing, only offering. Her presence had become the spine of the program. Volunteers came and went, but she remained a steady flame. The father visited often, though not in suits anymore. He arrived in rolled sleeves, sometimes carrying his son's backpack, sometimes just sitting in the corner, watching. The boy had grown. Stronger, not perfect, not cured, but freer. His steps were his own, and each one carved deeper into his father's resolve. Change had spilled outward, past the studio walls. Corporate boardrooms where silence once meant power now heard him speak of dignity. He funded accessibility in theaters, ensured city contracts require inclusive spaces, and demanded schools stop measuring progress only by speed or conformity. His colleagues thought he had gone soft. In truth, he had finally learned hardness wasn't strength. It was fragility in disguise. The boy still stumbled. Sometimes he froze mid-step, frustration twisting his face. But where once the father would have swooped in with commands or solutions, he now stayed still, steady as a shadow, letting the child find his own balance. And each time the boy did, on one particular afternoon, the father stood beside the window as his son, braces gleaming, turned in a slow circle, music swelling. The woman clapped once, softly. "He's leading," she said. The father exhaled, almost a laugh, almost a sob. "Yes," he whispered, "and I'm finally learning how to follow." The city outside went on as it always had, horns blaring, deals being made, fortunes rising and falling. But within that studio, something larger than wealth had taken root. A system had changed, and it had begun with one step on one unforgettable night, when silence gave way to movement. Years later, people still spoke of that night beneath the chandeliers. not because of the money pledged or the power gathered, but because of a single, trembling step that changed the shape of a family. And, in time, a city. The father had learned what his fortune could never buy. That leadership is not about control, but about surrender. He had built towers of steel and glass, but his greatest monument stood in the quiet courage of a boy who dared to stand on his own. It's not about perfection, he would remind boardrooms and classrooms alike. It's about connection. And when he said it, he thought not of profits or policies, but the moment he released his son's hand and discovered freedom in letting go. The waitress who became a guide remained at his side, not as an employee, but as a partner in purpose. Together, they created spaces where every child's first step, however shaky, was celebrated. Spaces where silence no longer carried shame, but expectation. The boy kept leading. Sometimes slowly, sometimes with stumbles, but always forward. And his father followed, humbly, gratefully, step for step. Because in the end, the greatest wealth he had ever known was not in owning the floor, but in learning when to yield it. If this story moved you, share it forward. Someone, somewhere, may be waiting for permission to take their own first step.